Welcome back to another edition of the Pagcast. I'm your host, Michael Pagani, joined alongside San Jose Sharks play-by-play announcer, Randy Hahn. Randy, thank you again for coming on.
Sure, Michael, my pleasure.
And, a lot of people during this downtime have turned towards Netflix. What have you been doing during quarantine?
Well, a little bit of that. Finally, I started the series Ozark from the beginning again because my girlfriend hadn't seen the first 2 years I had. So we watched that from the beginning and then watched season 3 together for the first time. Before that, I was a little late to the party on Game of Thrones. So I was only about halfway through that and powered through that. So those were some of the things I watched on TV. And I've just been actually working almost every day. She owns a cupcake shop. So I've been driving a cupcake delivery car all around the Bay Area Monday through Friday. So it gets me out of the house and I meet a lot of people and it's been fun.
Do you ever get recognized as the San Jose Sharks play-by-play?
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you're rolling up with cupcakes in a box and hey, wait a minute. I know you, even with a mask on. So that's been kind of fun, and it's been a surprise for some people. And then when word got out that I put it out on social media, I was doing that. Then people specifically asked that I was going to be delivering to their house. So it's been fun.
Now, during this whole crisis, the state of California for you issued a stay-at-home order. Is that when the whole coronavirus became surreal for you?
Well, we were on the road with the Sharks when the NHL paused the season in the middle of March. We were in Chicago in the middle of a game when the NBA canceled their season. And then we flew after the game to St. Louis to play there a couple days later. And of course, that game never took place. The league, the NHL halted the season the next day. And then we all flew back to San Jose to kind of wait what would happen, not really knowing. And then, the reality set in when it was apparent that there would be no more regular season, because for the Sharks, even with the expanded 2014 format, they were not going to be in the playoffs. So that's when it hit that, if everything goes as planned, we probably won't play a game again until December.
Has your perception changed on the whole coronavirus since March?
Well, yeah, I mean, it continues to evolve every week, every day sometimes. And we've seen so much change in the knowledge that the health officials have had. When it first came out, they said, you don't really need to wear a mask. That's not going to change anything. And now they're mandating that you wear masks, and it's become a big controversy in this country, more so than in Canada, where everybody seems to be respecting the fact that wearing a mask is very important. And I think the majority of Americans are doing that, but there still is a very vocal minority out there that feel their rights are being infringed upon and they shouldn't have to wear a mask. And I understand some of the confusion when, people are being written tickets for wearing masks or for not wearing masks in a public place, yet thousands of people were allowed to go out and protest, and in some cases riot and loot, and none of them got arrested for not wearing masks or not social distancing. So there's a lot of confusion about it and a lot of emotion about it here. Not so much for me. I'm wearing a mask and have done so since the beginning.
It's all about keeping each other safe as well as yourself safe.
Well, that's what you hope people look at it as, but some people don't see it that way. They're concerned more about themselves rather than the greater good.
Getting into your story a bit here, who influenced you to get into sports journalism?
Boy, there was a lot of influences early on in my career. I kind of fell into radio broadcasting when I was still in high school. I was 15 or 16 years old when I got to work on a radio station and get paid to do it. So I was still going to high school and working part-time at a radio station in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory. And, a neighbor who worked at the station asked me if I was interested in a part-time job there, just kind of behind the scenes. And that eventually morphed into me being able to get my hands on equipment and then eventually have a radio show. And that's where it sort of all kicked off. But, I've had so many influences throughout my career. From the very beginning, Bill Good, who used to work on Hockey Night in Canada back in the 70s and 80s. He was one of the big influences in my life, the Montreal Canadiens, and I noticed your hat there. They had won the Stanley Cup. This was in the 70s, and I was working at the radio station in Whitehorse. And that summer, the Montreal Canadiens came up to Whitehorse to play in a charity softball tournament. And I got to cover their visit to our city. And in fact, actually got to go on a fly-in fishing trip with the players. And Bill Good was there covering it for Hockey Night in Canada. He kind of took me under his wing. And then when I eventually went to UBC in Vancouver, he helped me by way of introduction to get a job in radio in Vancouver. And that's where my career really launched. I went from radio in Vancouver to doing television in Edmonton. And, those were some of the critical moments in my career to, go from just being a kid in a small station in Whitehorse to working on Vancouver Canucks broadcast, BC Lions broadcast, and then in Edmonton working on the Oilers when Gretzky was there, Edmonton Eskimos, Edmonton Drillers. That was really when things took a big upturn for me.
Well, you did grow up in Edmonton, correct?
I lived there till I was about 13. So that's where I was born, went to, school, junior high, and was a sports fan, but didn't really know that I wanted to be a broadcaster at that time. I was very interested in listening to the games, especially the football games, because these were the years before the Oilers even were in the WHA. They weren't in the NHL yet. So we had a Western Hockey League team, the Edmonton Oil Kings, and I wasn't as interested in that as I was in the CFL and the Edmonton Eskimos. We had a good team back in those days. It wasn't the dynasty it would become later with Warren Moon and that whole group, but I would listen to those games on the radio. There weren't that many on TV, but on radio I would listen religiously, and those were just tremendously exciting. And also Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday nights. That was pretty much always on in the house. So I kind of vicariously would watch that. And if it was a Canadiens game, I wasn't as excited because I was a Leafs fan. So if it was a Toronto game, I was really into it. But if it was Toronto against Montreal, then I would for sure watch it. But my favorite players, probably in the early days, my favorite player was Dave Keon, who was the captain of the Leafs. So that's kind of the era in the 60s and early 70s when I was kind of interested in hockey, but of course not realizing that someday I would work in the NHL.
You were fortunate enough to call a playoff series between the Sharks and the Oilers back in 2017. Was there any hometown vibes that you got when the series shifted over towards Edmonton?
Well, actually, there was a series before that also, the year the Oilers went to the Stanley Cup and ended up losing to Carolina. So that would have been 2006. And the Sharks also played the Oilers that year in the playoffs. Rafi Torres had a big hit on Milan Mahalik, which kind of changed the series in Edmonton's favor. We lost that. Probably after the Sharks, the Oilers are kind of my second team of interest, primarily because it was my hometown. And then when I went back there to do my first TV job, I was also working radio at the same time in Edmonton. I worked on the Oilers broadcast. So I worked on those before I ever worked on a Sharks game. So I had that connection to the team, and that was before they went on their run of Stanley Cups. Gretzky had just gotten there, and they had Paul Coffey, and they had Andy Mogan goal. Grant Fuhr wasn't even there yet in those days. So that was kind of the embryonic days. And I guess when I was there, they had the big playoff upset of Montreal in the opening round. That was kind of the beginning. It's when the Oilers were ignited as a team to be reckoned with in the future. So maybe a little torn, not so much now. My name is on a paycheck signed by the Sharks. So that's where my loyalties will lie, even though Edmonton's my hometown.
Now, even before the Sharks made it into the NHL, you were actually a big advocate for the Bay Area to get an NHL team. How rewarding is it for you now knowing how successful San Jose is?
Oh, it's very rewarding. We were living here in the San Jose area in the late 80s, and San Jose voted to build a new arena, which is now SAP Center. And the feeling back then was that the Golden State Warriors, the basketball team, would move to San Jose to play in that new arena. Well, that never happened. And we were of the belief, some of us who were hockey fans in the area, and there was a couple of attorneys and I that became friendly and kind of got together with this idea of promoting San Jose as an NHL city. The NHL had been in the Bay Area before with the Oakland Seals. back in '67 when the expansion happened. But then they went away. They moved on. But we felt with the explosion of Silicon Valley and all the technology and all the people who had moved into this area from hockey areas like the East Coast, like areas of Ottawa in Canada where there's a lot of technology. And we felt that the time was right for the NHL to come back. So we formed a group and we kind of were advocates. We didn't have the money to buy the team, but we brought ownership to the table. We attracted that. And so to be able to broadcast games after that was very rewarding. And now we're 30 years later. It's amazing to see how successful the franchise has been.
Would you agree that is one of the many ways you did get the job with the San Jose Sharks?
Well, I mean, it was one of the reasons I got involved with the group was to try and create a team to create a job. Ironically, after doing a lot of the work with one ownership group, there was a change right before the team was announced to be an expansion team. And the people I was working with, Howard Baldwin, who's the old Hartford Whaler owner, and his group ended up trading their rights to San Jose to take over the Minnesota North Stars, which would later become the Dallas Stars. So at the last minute, I was on the outs and really not in the prime position to be the TV voice for the Sharks. But I was the backup TV voice for the first 2 years. So I did about 15 games a season the first 2 years. And then by year 3, I was offered the opportunity to do all the games. So for the last 28 years, 28 years, I've done all the games.
Were you ever nervous calling your first NHL game?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had never even done an American Hockey League game, an East Coast Hockey League game when I did my first NHL game. I did a lot of indoor soccer for about 10 years in San Diego. I was the voice of the San Diego Sockers. And that really helped me for hockey because indoor soccer, if you've seen it, is played on a hockey surface in an arena with AstroTurf over the ice. There's 3 forwards, 2 defenders, and a goalkeeper. So that's kind of the same feel and cadence in the call of a hockey game, not quite as fast as hockey. So I had a lot of reps for 10 years of doing indoor soccer, and that was I was able to transfer that over to hockey quite easily. But of course, very nervous in my first game. First game I ever did as the play-by-play for the Sharks was in New Jersey, and the score after the first period was 3-0 Devils. And then after the end of the second period, it was 6-0 Devils, and the final score was 9-0 Devils. So that was a rather interesting debut game to try and make it listenable, viewable for Sharks fans. It was impossible. They didn't even score, and they got blown out. In fact, I didn't broadcast a win until my second year.
Oh, wow.
So I went probably 16 or 17 broadcasts without ever doing a win. I never told anybody that because we know about superstition and stuff like that in the NHL. If they would have known that every time I came that they lost, I probably would have been fired. But anyway, I got through it, finally got to do a win. And then by year 3, of course, we made the playoffs.
Interestingly enough, you actually did the play-by-play of the NHL video game series when 2K owned it, of 2K 9, 10, and 11. Do you think that helped you brand your voice?
It certainly did. It was a lot of work. It was tremendously tedious work. I actually did a game before that, NHL Blades of Steel. It was the remake of one of the first ever Nintendo games. And that one, took me a couple of days. But to do the 2K series, the first time we laid down the first year of it, took 125 hours in the studio.
Oh my God.
So it was very involving. It took over a month of going there like 4 or 5 days a week, and they would only record me for 5 hours at a time. So it took a long time to finish that game. And I don't know what it takes now. I haven't done one in a few years, but it certainly did help to brand me outside of the Bay Area. And now, of course, doing games on NBCSN, which end up airing on Sportsnet's, one of Sportsnet's channels in Canada from time to time, I'm seen more nationally and North America wide. But in those days, if you weren't living in the Bay Area and watching Sharks games, you probably didn't know much about me. And those video games certainly changed that.
Now, you do have one of the best women's hockey players coming to your broadcast crew in Kendall Coyne Schofield to color commentate. How big is it for her to get women in broadcasting, knowing that the industry is kind of male dominated?
Well, it's been great for all of us. Obviously, a terrific opportunity for her as she continues to still play on the U.S. national team. So it's been a real challenge for her to try and learn the TV biz. And she'd had some past experience doing some games on NBCSN, but was never thrown into the role with a team as she was this year. So great opportunity for her. Great for us to broaden our viewer base with, I think, women who are excited that they could turn on an NHL broadcast and hear a woman's point of view, and a woman who comes from a tremendous point of credibility, being a current player, a gold medalist on the U.S. national women's team. So it worked out great. We don't know going forward for whenever next season is that will be in place again. I suppose it depends on logistics. Will we even next season be broadcasting games in the arenas, or will it be like it will be for these playoffs, where for the most part, all the broadcasters will be in a remote site and only the players who are in the bubble will be at the games? And I don't know. I hope it's not that way for next season, but it could be, and that could affect how many people are on the broadcast.
You broadcasted 1,000 games when you broadcasted the game against the Calgary Flames in 2009. How did you celebrate that plateau?
I had a party at a restaurant nearby. It was a Hockey Night in Canada game on a Saturday, and Kevin Weeks and Scott Oakes crashed my party. They've been friends over the years, but I had invited maybe 100 people to a restaurant, and then word got out, and somehow they found out about it. They just showed up. They weren't invited, but they were welcome to come in and drink free booze. Still haven't got either one of them to buy me a cocktail ever. But it was a fun night, and had family and friends that flew in for it. And coming up on 1,900 games now, so we'll have to do it again in a couple of seasons, hopefully.
What did you see in the streets of San Jose when they made the Stanley Cup Finals in 2016 against the Pittsburgh Penguins?
The night they knocked out St. Louis in the Western Conference Final was a really special night. I'll never forget that. It was probably the most special night of all because they ended up losing the Stanley Cup, so you didn't have that kind of night where you're celebrating a cup. But to know that the franchise was finally going to go to the Stanley Cup was tremendous, and to have the clinching game in San Jose, I mean, people spilled out into the streets, and all the restaurants and bars around the arena were just going crazy. And I got home probably around 3 a.m. I couldn't get an Uber. It was just impossible to find one. There were so many people out. So I was kind of walking around looking for a cab if I could get that. And some fan just rolled up, like random Sharks fan dude. And he was yelling, Randy, where are you going? I said, I'm trying to go home, but I can't get an Uber. He says, come on in, I'll drive you home. So this dude who I'd never met before in my life drove me all the way home. So I guess we both had a good story to tell that night.
Now, despite being a broadcaster, did you get chills from the fans during the finals?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I never got to broadcast the games in the finals because those were on NBC exclusively. So that was a little bit disappointing that I couldn't actually be on the air calling the games. But, that meant I was either in the press box or going around luxury suites and meeting some of our sponsors and fans. And it was nice to be able to do that too, and enjoy the victories, especially the win when Donskoy scored in overtime. That was a huge win to win that way in the Stanley Cup final. But, ultimately, unfortunately, it was disappointing that they weren't able to take down the Penguins.
Is it bittersweet at all having the Penguins win on the road in the Shark Tank?
Well, you never want to see somebody lift the Stanley Cup in your own building. But the thing that disappointed me the most about that night, aside from knowing that we weren't going to win the Cup, was how many people left the arena before the Stanley Cup was presented.
What?
I was astonished by that. Even adults taking their kids out and leaving before seeing that occur. It was unthinkable to me that even though you lost, you wouldn't stay to see the Cup handed to Sidney Crosby and the Penguins parade around. It's such a special moment for the players, especially those who haven't never won the Stanley Cup before. I mean, it's tear-filled, it's joyful. The families come on the ice, as you know. And I was stunned that so many people left before that presentation. And that maybe speaks to the fact that we're still a new market. Even though we're 30 years old, we're not as ingrained into the history of the NHL as you could imagine if the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup in Montreal. The fans
oh my God.
they'd stay for all of it, and applaud the Avalanche for winning, the better team. But yeah, that was weird.
And, speaking of stunning, that actually leads, perfect right into the next topic, which was the Game 7 against Vegas. We all remember how that went down. It was the perfect Game 7. But, the Sharks were down 3-1 in the series. We can't forget that. And that's no easy task to come back. Going into Game 5, could you get a sense that the series was turning towards the Sharks' favor?
You know what? I didn't feel that. And I still didn't even feel it in Game 6. But Martin Jones in Game 6 in Vegas probably played the game of his life. He was absolutely phenomenal. And then as it goes, you get into double overtime, and they finally call a penalty. That's usually the overtime where the penalty gets called, right? In double.
Yeah.
The refs put their whistles away in the first overtime, and they don't want to influence it because it's potentially a series-ending game if Vegas scores in Game 6 in overtime. And then it gets to the second overtime, and the Sharks get a penalty, and it's like, oh no, this is it. And then for Hertl to score shorthanded,
he sniped it, man.
To force Game 7 was stunning. And so even though you hope the momentum was shifting, if it could have easily gone the other way, and Jonathan Marchessault or Mark Stone scores, and the series is over, and we're going home. And it was so stunning for Hertl to score that goal. And I thought, wow, we've just seen the best game of this series. Well, we hadn't. That was coming in Game 7.
What were your immediate reactions when Vegas jumped out to a 3-0 lead in Game 7?
Well, by the early third period, it was 3-0, and now you've got about 15 minutes to go in the third period, and you're being shut out, and it's not looking good. And I'm starting to think about what I'm going to say during the handshake.
Oh yeah,
congratulations to Vegas. But the Sharks fought a good fight. They were amazing in Game 6 to battle back, and don't lose hope they'll be back next year. I mean, I've got to start thinking about how I'm going to present the handshake with Vegas moving on to the second round. And then with 10 minutes to go, it all changed, as we know. And one of the most amazing comebacks, controversial finishes, gut-wrenching roller coaster ride, come back with 3 power play goals in a row to tie it, then go ahead with a 4th, then lose the lead late.
Yeah.
So ties it up, and then for it to go to overtime. And then a guy who barely played in the whole game, Barclay Goodrow, Pete DeBoer throws him over the boards. Erik Karlsson finds him, and he beats Fleury for a truly, if Game 6's goal by Hertl was stunning, then, Game 7 is the double stunner by Goodrow. But it was the most amazing sporting event I was ever at in my life. And I've done World Cups in soccer, and I've done elimination games between Brazil and Argentina, 2 of the greatest rivals in World Cup history, but nothing came close to that Game 7.
Now, Joe Pavelski did go down after Cody Eakin tied him up off the faceoff, which got the 5-minute major call. Do you think the NHL made the right decision immediately after the call?
Well, I mean, the referee's on the ice. You've got the captain of the other team laying in a pool of blood after getting cross-checked. Cody Eakin cross-checked Joe Pavelski. The cross-check didn't cause him to bleed. His hitting the ice caused him to bleed. That's where the injury occurred, when his head hit the ice. But he was cross-checked. So there was going to be a penalty called, a minor for cross-checking, maybe. But as soon as there's a pool of blood on the ice, I mean, what are you going to do here? It's not a reviewable call, and you're the on-ice officials, and the captain of one of the teams is carried off the ice with a pool of blood. I don't know how you just call 2 minutes there. That is a major penalty in the eyes of the officials in that moment. And sure, we can all go back afterwards and dissect it and break it down. But you look at the lead up to that event, and the kind of punishment in that third period that Pavelski was taking in front of the Vegas net. He was getting pounded, and they were letting it go. Okay, fair enough. He was in there trying to screen Fleury, trying to get a tip, trying to get a goal. It was still 3-0, and he was just getting destroyed in the front of the net. Refs are seeing that. They're saying it's a playoff game. We're going to let it go. Well, all of a sudden now he's in a pool of blood. They're not going to let that go. So it was what it was. It ended up resulting in 2 NHL rules being changed for the next year just from that one event in one game. So obviously it was controversial, and Vegas fans are going to be upset about it forever. But, at some point the onus was on the Vegas penalty kill there in that 5 minutes to kill a couple of minutes off, and they just couldn't. And they gave up 4 power play goals, and that ended up, telling the story for the most part of that game.
Vegas did, like you mentioned, tied it up late with 47 seconds to go in the third period. Do you remember at all how silent the building went?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you go from the devastation of being down 3-0, then the elation of going up 4-3, and then it's like, oh no, after all that, we're still going to blow it. I mean, it was a tough one to swallow, but that's credit to Vegas. They didn't give up. They didn't quit, even though they had to swallow the humble pie of giving up 4 power play goals. They came back and forced overtime. So full marks to them. And, then it's next goal wins. So it was, again, the emotional roller coaster of that game from that 10-minute mark on. I'll probably never call anything like that again.
You were part of the promotional schedule this year, getting a bobblehead. How jacked were you when you read about that?
Yeah, that was fun. They did a broadcaster bobblehead of myself, Dan Ruzanowski, our radio voice, Jamie Baker, and Brett Hedican, who both work with me. And interestingly, both former players, of course, and Baker most prominently as a Shark, and Brett Hedican winning the Stanley Cup as a member of the Carolina Hurricanes, but neither of them had ever had a bobblehead as players. So it was fun for them, exciting for them. It was a lot of fun, and the fans seemed to enjoy it. And that was a cool event.
This year's All-Star Game trialed player and puck tracking. How are you going to use that to your broadcast?
Well, we've got to see. I don't think it's going to be part of these playoffs now, as the COVID pause changed the priorities, and that didn't become one, as it turns out. So I'm assuming that we'll get it next year, and we'll see if the regular season starts with the player tracking and all that data. But I'm interested to see it first, try and figure out what parts of it matter within the live moment of the game. I know a lot of it is going to be wagering oriented data that is going to be used for people who are literally on their phones and placing prop bets, like who's going to win the next face off and, stuff like that. I'm sure we're going to be using a lot of the data on there. I just don't know how it's going to interface with our telecast yet in real time. I could imagine we're going to get to the point in the future, and that's probably not that far away, where on TV at home with your remote, you'll be able to decide the elements of the tracking that you want to see on your screen. And that'll include how fast the players are skating. And, those of us who remember back on the Fox TV days in the US when they had the glowing puck and the tracking of how fast the slap shots went and the puck would turn red and things like that, I think you'll be able to do those things again too. I always liked that. I know the traditionalists hated those kind of graphics on the screen, but I was hoping someday we'd have a choice to either with your remote have those graphics or not. And I think we're coming back around to now where people will be able to select. But, initially I think we'll see ice time things, speed of slap shots, things of that nature, how many shifts per period, the kind of stuff that is out there now. If you have the real-time stats running while you're watching a game, now they'll appear on the screen and they'll be much more easy to digest. But I'm sure that as we go along with all of this new data and information over the years, more and more will find its way into the broadcast.
Well, I think the most important thing when dealing with all this data that we have is to make sure the screen isn't as clunky as people might see,
Yeah, and I think that's where it comes to, once we have that interface where you can choose what you want, then you might like to have the crawl underneath with your data. You might like to have the score box up in the corner with where your data comes, or you might not want any of it. I think that's going to be the perfect blend. But I could see right now either an upper screen or a lower screen crawl where a lot of that data shows up.
What challenges might the new Seattle team bring to San Jose?
Well, as we saw with Vegas, I mean, going to the Stanley Cup final in their first year, Seattle's got a lot to live up to. And I'm not sure that they're going to have quite the advantage at the draft that Vegas did in the expansion draft, because Vegas took full advantage of the new drafting rules. And I think everybody's a little wiser now to how they're going to look to protect certain kinds of players. So it's going to be challenging for Seattle. As far as how they're going, what a challenge it's going to be for us. I think it's actually going to be good for us because it's another team in our time zone. It's going to help the travel for us. Mm-hmm. We'll basically have a division of teams that are all in the Pacific time zone. And just from a standpoint of going from San Jose to Seattle, it's a 2-hour flight or so. And then if you're on a road trip that includes Vancouver, it's another 30 minutes to Vancouver. So it'll be great from that standpoint. And anytime you have, teams in your own region, your own time zone, you're more likely to have rivalries with those teams, as we certainly have seen between the Sharks and Vegas.
Now, the NHL is hoping to have a full 82-game slate starting in December. And, as broadcasters and as a fan myself, we all want to be back inside the building with fans. Do you think the Board of Governors and NHL would both agree on sending a memo out to teams where they can set their own fan capacity?
I don't know that the teams are going to be allowed to set their capacity. I think the health officials in each region of North America are the ones who are going to be telling the teams what they're going to allow. San Jose Arena SAP Center is a publicly owned building by the city of San Jose. The NHL, Board of Governors, the Sharks, neither of those entities has the right to determine policy in a public building. That's up to the city of San Jose or the county of Santa Clara and the health officials. So I think it's going to be left up to those people. Of course, there'll be involvement with the NHL and the Sharks to help determine what's safe and what's best. But short of us all having that magic vaccine that we hope is coming, I can't imagine of 17,582 people being in our arena until there's a vaccine.
Now, despite the Sharks not making this year's playoffs, will you tune into a couple of games?
Oh, no, I'll watch as much as I can. Playoff hockey is always great, especially the first round. Now we've got the play-in round before the first round, and the potential for, huge upsets there. You could get a team that, before the pause, you would consider to be a team that had a real good shot to maybe take a run at a cup. They could get knocked out in the first round by a team that wouldn't even normally have been in the playoffs without this. So that's going to be exciting. There's going to be a lot of games every day. I guess there's going to be 3 at each venue. So that's 6 games a day on a lot of days, at least in that first round. So there'll be lots of hockey to digest, and I don't know if I'll watch each and every minute of every game because there'll be some overlap.
Yeah.
No, I'll be definitely into watching it as much as I can.
Patrick Marleau and Joe Thornton are both the father figures of the San Jose Sharks. How has your relationship grown with them since you met them?
Well, I mean, I've known Patrick since he was 17 when he came to his first training camp. He turned 18 before the start of that first season. So, it's somebody I've known for almost 23, 24 years. And I wish the best of luck to him with Pittsburgh. And hopefully he can finally get a ring on his finger. And Joe Thornton came to us in 2005, the biggest trade in Sharks history and the trade that changed this franchise more than any other they've ever made. And Joe's become a friend over the years. And, we'll see if the Sharks don't play again until December or maybe even January. Will the layoffs since March be helpful for 42-year-old Joe Thornton, or will that accelerate his decision to retire? I don't know, but everything I hear from Joe and, whenever I talk to Joe, it's not about retirement. That's not the utmost thing on my mind. There's other journalists who do that. But when I hear him respond to those questions within the last 3-4 months since the pause, there's been no indication to me at all that he intends to stop playing. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Joe Thornton play for a year or maybe even more, and maybe even finish his career in Europe someday. That's how much he loves the game.
Now, I must ask, has there been any internal competition between Joe Thornton and Brent Burns on who can grow the longest beard?
Yeah, they were internally competing for years. I'm going to give I'm going to give the beauty nod to Thornton with that gray and brown and black all mixed in together. But Burns can grow a pretty decent beard too. But my joke with Joe Thornton is, even when he would shave his beard, and he has again this summer, he could grow a new one in between periods. I mean, that's how fast his facial hair grows. He has a 5 o'clock shadow at noon. So, they're both capable of growing robust facial hair. That's for sure. I could not compete.
The San Jose Sharks had a huge roster turnover this year. What information are you able to give fans outside the San Jose area on, like Alexander True or Dylan Gambrell and Tim He? Like, people might not know these guys.
Yeah, I don't know where the organization is going here. From what Doug Wilson says, the general manager, he feels that last season was a blip. He feels it was an aberration, and that a major correction, and by that I'm talking a major turnover of veteran players, isn't what he has in mind. So that would tell me that, the big boys will all be back. The three big guys on defense, Burns, Vlasic, and Erik Karlsson. And up front, you have players locked into long-term contracts like Logan Couture and Evander Kane and Timo Meier and Tomas Hertl and elsewhere. I think if you're looking for places where the Sharks are going to change, it's probably going to be in those third and fourth line roles, unless he changes his mind, which it's certainly his prerogative, and he does move one of the big pieces and goes out and gets a scorer. Kevin Labank's a free agent. Does he come back, or is he going to go somewhere else? I don't know. And then you have some of the players with the Barracuda in the American Hockey League who got a taste last year, but none of which made a huge impact on a team that didn't make the playoffs, if you know what I mean. So a lot of that's up in the air as to who's going to emerge and push for spots in training camp, which we hope will be in November. But certainly, just as there is every year, there's a lot of turnover on teams. And one of those big ticket guys could end up getting traded. You never know. And then for me, the biggest area of concern was in net, and the goaltending wasn't good enough. And in the regular season, the year before, it wasn't good enough. Jones came back and had a great playoff, actually, including that game 5 or game 6 rather against Vegas that I alluded to, and then on into the playoffs. In the subsequent rounds against Colorado and St. Louis, he was very good, but then tailed off again last season and just wasn't the go-to number one guy that we were used to. And then Aaron Dell backed up, and his contract has expired and hasn't been re-signed. So there's going to be changes, always is, but the changes this year will be very interesting to see if the Sharks can get on track again next year, or if this indeed is going to be more of a rebuild.
Last question here on the Pagcast. Randy, do you have any advice for aspiring sports journalists?
Well, if you want to be play-by-play broadcaster in the NHL, I would say you should never, ever do that. That's a job that I like, and I don't want some young guy taking it. No, I'm just kidding. If you aspire to be a hockey broadcaster, I would say do whatever you can to start doing it, even if it's a youth team and you do your own games online just for the parents, or a podcast or something, or even just doing it into your phone and recording it while you're watching a game with the sound turned down, an NHL game. Getting the words out of your mouth, getting the feeling of listening back to yourself and making yourself better each and every time. That's the hardest thing to do. You can go to the best sports journalism or broadcasting college in Canada, which is probably Ryerson in Toronto, and you can come out of there and graduate with the best degree that money could buy. But if you can't turn a microphone on and call a game into a microphone and sound good, then it doesn't matter what your degree is. The degree is important, but the practical experience of getting the words out of your mouth and getting reps and getting used to it and doing it over and over and over again, that's key. And I would say do whatever you can to replicate that. If you're not actually doing live games, do them off a TV screen. At least you're going through the process.
Well, I'd like to thank San Jose Sharks play-by-play Randy Hahn for joining me on today's podcast. Thank you again, Randy.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me on. Go wash your hands.